There are moments when the world stops turning. When everything we believe about kindness and cruelty, about who deserves dignity and who deserves contempt, shatters in an instant. This is one of those moments. A story about a woman whose compassion was met with scorn, whose daily acts of grace were invisible to everyone who mattered, and whose life would be transformed by a truth that had been hiding behind frail hands and a weathered face for longer than anyone could have imagined. Her name was Naomi. She was 28 years old, though life had aged her in ways that numbers couldn't measure. She worked the morning shift at Rosie's Diner, a place where the coffee was always hot, the floors were always sticky, and the customers were always in a hurry to be somewhere more important. It sat on the corner of Marshall Street, in a neighborhood that developers called up and coming, but residents knew was just slowly dying, one boarded storefront at a time. Naomi had been working at Rosie's for 6 years. 6 years of double shifts and aching feet, of grease stains that never quite washed out of her uniform, of tips that barely covered the bus fare home. She lived in a one-bedroom apartment 3 miles away, a place where the heat worked when it felt like it, and the landlord answered calls when he felt like it. But it was hers. Or at least, she paid for it. That counted for something. Every morning at 6:15, the bell above the diner's door would chime, and he would walk in. An old man, maybe 80, maybe older. Thin as a reed, with hands that trembled when he reached for things, and eyes that seemed to look past the world rather than at it. He wore the same clothes every day. A faded brown jacket with patches on the elbows, pants that hung loose on his frame, shoes that had seen better decades. His hair was white and sparse, combed carefully over a spotted scalp. He moved slowly, deliberately, like every step cost him something precious. The first time he came in, Naomi was wiping down tables near the window. She watched him shuffle through the door, watched other customers glance at him and then quickly look away, the way people do when they encounter something that makes them uncomfortable. Poverty has a smell, her grandmother used to say. Not of dirt, wet, but of invisibility. People can smell when you don't matter, and they turn away from it like smoke. The old man stood by the entrance for a moment, uncertain. The other waitress, a woman named Diane, who had been there longer than the coffee stains on the ceiling, looked up from her order pad, saw him, and immediately busied herself with something else. The message was clear. He wasn't her problem. Naomi set down her rag and walked over. "Good morning," she said, her voice warm despite the early hour and the exhaustion already settling into her bones. "Just one today?" The old man looked at her with surprise, as if he hadn't expected to be spoken to like a person. He nodded slowly. "Yes, just me. Always just me." She led him to a booth by the window, the one with the torn vinyl seat, that no one else wanted. She didn't hand him a menu. She could tell by looking at him that menus were just decorations, full of prices that lived in a different world than his. Instead, she asked him what he'd like. "Coffee," he said quietly. His voice was scratchy, like it didn't get used often. "Just coffee. Black, dark, and maybe, if it's not too much trouble, a piece of toast." She smiled at him. "It's no trouble at all." She brought him coffee in the chipped white mug that was reserved for customers who wouldn't complain. She brought him 2 pieces of toast, not one, with butter and a small container of jam that she took from the back where they kept the supplies for catering orders. She set it all down gently in front of him. "On the house," she said. He looked up at her sharply. "I can pay. I have money." "I know you do," she said. "But today, it's on me. Consider it a welcome." His eyes filled with something that might have been tears, but he blinked them away. He picked up the toast with those trembling hands and ate slowly, savoring each bite like it was the finest meal he'd ever had. When he finished, he left 3 crumpled dollar bills on the table, carefully smoothed out and placed under the coffee cup. It was probably everything he had in his pocket. That was the beginning. Every morning after that, at 6:15 exactly, he would come in. And every morning, Naomi would be there to greet him. She learned his name eventually, though it took weeks. He didn't offer it easily, and she didn't push. When he finally told her, it was almost a whisper. "Samuel. My name is Samuel." She shook his hand formally, like they were meeting at a business lunch instead of in a diner that smelled of bacon grease and old dreams. "I'm Naomi. It's good to know you, Samuel." As the weeks turned into months, a routine formed. Samuel would sit at his booth. Naomi would bring him coffee and toast. They would talk, brief exchanges that never lasted more than a few minutes, but carried more weight than hours of conversation with other people. He asked her about her life, and she told him things she didn't tell anyone else. About her mother who had died when she was 16. About her younger brother who was trying to stay out of trouble in a neighborhood designed to trap him in it. About her dream of going back to school someday, studying nursing, helping people in a way that mattered. Samuel listened with an intensity that made her feel seen, truly seen, maybe for the first time in years. He never offered advice or platitudes. He just listened, nodded, and sometimes said things like, "You have a good heart. The world needs more people with good hearts." She would brush it off, embarrassed. "I'm just doing what anyone would do." But they both knew that wasn't true. Most people wouldn't. Most people didn't. The other staff at the diner noticed the daily ritual, and it became a source of mockery. Diane would roll her eyes whenever Samuel came in. "Your boyfriend's here," she'd say with a smirk. Naomi would ignore her, but the comment stung. Another waitress, younger and newer, once asked why Naomi wasted her time on someone who obviously had nothing to give. "He leaves you $3 for coffee and toast. That's not even 15%. You know he's probably homeless, right?" Naomi looked at her for a long moment before answering. "He's a human being. That's all I need to know." The younger waitress laughed, a sharp sound with no humor in it. "You're never going to get ahead with that attitude. This is a business, not a charity." "Maybe," Naomi said quietly, "but I can live with my reflection in the mirror every morning. Can you?" The manager, a man named Rick, who spent more time in his office watching sports than managing anything, occasionally emerged to complain about Samuel's presence. "He's taking up a table during rush hour," Rick said one morning, gesturing at Samuel, who was sitting quietly by the window, making his single cup of coffee last as long as possible. "We need that space for real customers." "Real customers," Naomi repeated, her voice tight. "He's a real customer. You know what I mean. People who actually spend money. I've seen his tips. $3. That's insulting." "To you, maybe," Naomi said. "To me, it's everything he has." Rick threw up his hands. "You're too soft, Naomi. That's your problem. You think being nice is going to change anything? It won't. The world doesn't reward nice. It eats it alive." She didn't argue. There was no point. Rick had already decided who mattered and who didn't, and no amount of words would change the equation in his head. But Naomi kept showing up for Samuel. She kept bringing him coffee and toast. She kept listening to his quiet observations about the weather, about the birds he saw on his walk to the diner, about the way the light changed with the seasons. He never talked about himself, about his past or his life. She didn't push. Everyone had things they didn't want to share, doors they kept locked for good reason. Then one morning, Samuel didn't come. 6:15 passed. 6:30. 7 o'clock. The booth, by the window, stayed empty. Naomi told herself not to worry. Maybe he was sick. Maybe he had something else to do. But a weight settled in her chest, heavy and cold, because she knew. She knew how fragile life was for people like Samuel. How easily someone could slip through the cracks and disappear, and no one would notice or care. The next morning, he still didn't come. Naomi asked around the neighborhood during her break, showing people a description of him, asking if anyone had seen an old man in a brown jacket. Most people just shrugged. The city was full of old men in brown jackets. None of them stood up. None of them mattered enough to remember. On the third day, Naomi was about to call the police, to file a missing person report, even though she barely knew more than his first name, when the bell above the door chimed at 6:15. And there he was. Samuel. Thinner than before, if that was possible. Moving even more slowly. But alive. The relief that flooded through Naomi was so intense it almost brought her to her knees. She walked over to him quickly, resisting the urge to hug him, to make sure he was real. Samuel, where have you been? I was worried sick. He looked at her with those distant eyes, but now there was something else in them. Embarrassment. Shame. I was in the hospital, he said quietly. Fell in my room. Couldn't get up for a while. Landlord found me eventually. She pulled out a chair and sat across from him, breaking every rule about servers staying on their feet. Are you okay? Do you need help? Do you have anyone who can check on you? He shook his head slowly. No family. No one close. Just me. Like I said. Always just me. She reached across the table and took his hand, those fragile trembling fingers that felt like they might break under the gentlest pressure. You're not alone, Samuel. You have me. I'm your friend. And friends look out for each other. He stared at their joined hands for a long moment, and when he looked up, there were tears running down his weathered cheeks. I didn't think I had any friends left in this world, he whispered. You do now, she said firmly. And I'm not going anywhere. From that day on, Naomi didn't just bring Samuel coffee and toast. She started bringing him things. From home. A warm scarf when the weather turned cold. A bottle of vitamins because he looked like he wasn't getting proper nutrition. A book she thought he might like. A worn paperback about birds that she'd found at a thrift store. He protested. Every time. You don't have to do this. I'm fine. But she would just smile and say, I know I don't have to. I want to. Friends want to help each other. The other staff's mockery intensified. Diane started calling Samuel Naomi's charity project. Rick made pointed comments about employees who cared more about sob stories than about doing their actual jobs. The other customers noticed too, the way people always notice when someone steps outside the invisible line society draws. Some of them whispered as they watched Naomi bring Samuel his coffee, watched her sit with him for a few minutes when she could spare them, watched her treat him like he was someone who mattered. A few customers complained to Rick. That waitress is spending too much time with that homeless man. It's uncomfortable. It's unprofessional. It's driving away business. Rick called Naomi into his office one afternoon. Look, he said, trying to sound reasonable but failing. I get it. You want to help people. That's admirable. But this is a business. You're making customers uncomfortable. You need to stop. Stop what? Stop being kind to a lonely old man who has nothing. Stop treating another human being with basic dignity. Rick leaned back in his chair, his expression hardening. Yes. If that's what it takes to keep this place running and keep your job, then yes. Stop. She stared at him for a long time. Then she stood up. Think about it, she said. But we both know I won't stop. Fire me if you want. But I won't stop. Rick didn't fire her. He needed the staff, and Naomi was reliable, always on time, never called in sick. So he let it go. But the tension remained hanging in the air like grease smoke, coating everything with a thin layer of resentment. Months passed. Fall turned to winter. Winter dragged itself towards spring. Every morning, Samuel came to the diner. Every morning, Naomi was there. Their friendship deepened in the way that friendships do when they're built on consistency, rather than grand gestures. He told her small things about his past, little pieces of a puzzle she didn't quite understand. He had been married once. His wife died 20 years ago. He had worked hard all his life. He had lost things, important things, but he didn't elaborate on what those things were. She didn't push. Everyone had losses they couldn't talk about. Then one Wednesday morning in March, everything changed. Samuel came in at 6:15 as usual. He sat in his usual booth. Naomi brought him his usual coffee and toast. But there was something different about him. He seemed agitated, nervous, his hands shaking more than usual. He kept glancing at the door like he was expecting someone, or maybe afraid someone would come. Naomi sat down across from him during a lull. "Samuel, what's wrong? You seem upset." He looked at her with an expression that was hard to read. "Regret, maybe. Sadness. Something else." "Naomi," he said slowly, "I need to tell you something. But I don't know how. You've been so kind to me. Kinder than I deserve. And I haven't been entirely honest with you." Her heart sank. She had seen this before. The moment when people revealed the thing they'd been hiding, the secret that explained everything. Was he dangerous? A criminal? Had she been wrong to trust him? Before he could continue, the bell above the door chimed. But this time, it wasn't the usual morning customer shuffle. This time, it was different. 4 men entered the diner. They were not the kind of men who usually came to Rosie's. They wore expensive suits, the kind that cost more than Naomi made in 6 months. Their shoes were polished to a shine that reflected the fluorescent lights. 3 of them were large, broad-shouldered, with the kind of presence that suggested they were trained to handle problems. The 4th man was older, carrying a leather briefcase, his silver hair perfectly styled, his expression all business. The diner went silent. Every conversation stopped. Every fork paused halfway to every mouth. People stared. Behind the 4 men, 2 more figures entered. They weren't dressed in suits. They wore dark tactical gear, earpieces visible, hands resting near their belts in a way that suggested they were armed. Bodyguards. The kind you saw protecting politicians or celebrities, not walking into a rundown diner on Marshall Street. Diane, who had been pouring coffee at the counter, nearly dropped the pot. Rick emerged from his office, his face pale, clearly wondering if they were about to be robbed or shut down by some government agency. The man with the briefcase looked around the diner with an expression of disdain barely concealed. His eyes swept past the peeling wallpaper, the cracked vinyl, booths, the faded pictures of food that probably never looked that good even when they were first taken. Then his gaze landed on Samuel, sitting quietly by the window with his coffee and toast. And his expression changed, softened. Something like relief crossed his face. "There you are," the man said, his voice carrying across the silent diner. "We've been looking everywhere." Naomi's mind raced. Who were these people? What did they want with Samuel? Was he in trouble? The large men in suits moved through the diner like they owned it, positioning themselves strategically. The bodyguards stayed near the door, hands still resting near their belts, eyes scanning the room for threats. The man with the briefcase walked directly to Samuel's booth. Whoa. He didn't acknowledge Naomi, didn't seem to see her at all. His entire focus was on the old man in the faded brown jacket. "Mr. Crawford," the man said formally. "We need to speak with you. It's urgent." Mr. Crawford. The name hit Naomi like cold water. She looked at Samuel, at this man she had been feeding and caring for. This man she thought she knew. Samuel Crawford. The name was familiar. Very familiar. But it couldn't be. That Crawford was a myth, a legend, a man who didn't exist in it. The same world as Rosie's Diner and sticky floors and $3 tips. Samuel didn't look at the man with the briefcase. He looked at Naomi. And in his eyes, she saw an apology, a plea for understanding, and a deep sadness. "I'm sorry," he said, quietly. "I should have told you. I wanted to, but I didn't know how." The man with the briefcase finally seemed to notice Naomi. He looked at her like she was a piece of furniture that needed to be moved out of the way. "Miss, if you could excuse us. This is a private matter." Naomi stood up slowly, her mind still trying to piece together what was happening. Samuel reached out and caught her wrist gently. "Wait," he said. "Please." She sat back down, more confused than ever. The man with the briefcase frowned. "Mr. Crawford, we really need to speak privately. There are matters of great importance that require your immediate attention. The board is convening this afternoon, and there are documents that need your signature." Samuel's voice, when he spoke, had changed. The scratchy, uncertain quality was gone, replaced by something firmer, clearer, a voice that was used to being heard and obeyed. "Marcus," he said, "I will address the board when I'm ready. Right now I'm having coffee with my friend." The man, Marcus apparently, looked shocked. "Sir, with all due respect, you've been missing for 3 weeks. We've had private investigators searching the entire city. Your family has been frantic. The company's stock has been in free fall because there are rumors you've had a stroke or worse. We need to make a statement, restore confidence, and handle the transition plans you outlined before you disappeared." Transition plans. Company stock. Board meetings. The words swirled in Naomi's head, not quite connecting into something that made sense. She looked at Samuel, this man who had been leaving her $3 tips and apologizing for being a bother. "Who are you?" she asked quietly. Samuel turned to her, and for the first time since she'd known him, he looked like someone different. Not weaker or frailer, but heavier somehow, weighted with something more than poverty and loneliness. "My full name is Samuel Joseph Crawford," he said. "I'm the founder and chairman of Crawford Industries. We manufacture medical equipment, pharmaceutical supplies, and hospital infrastructure systems. We have operations in 47 countries and employ roughly 82,000 people. The net worth of the company is approximately $11 billion, give or take." The diner was so quiet Naomi could hear the hum of the refrigerator behind the counter. $11 billion. She had been bringing toast to a man worth $11 billion. The absurdity of it would have been funny if she could remember how to breathe. "Why?" she whispered. "Why would you pretend to be homeless? Why come here? Why let me think that you were struggling?" Samuel's expression crumbled. "Because I was struggling," he said. "Not for money. For something more important. For humanity. For kindness that wasn't bought, or owed, or faked. For connection that mattered." He looked around the diner at the staff and customers who were all watching with wide eyes and open mouths. 3 months ago, my wife died. Rebecca. We'd been married for 58 years. When she went, something in me broke. Not physically. emotionally. I couldn't be in our house anymore. Couldn't be surrounded by servants and assistants and board members who only saw me as a signature on a contract or a name on a letterhead. I wanted to know if anyone would care about me if I had nothing. If I was just an old man with no money, no power, no influence. Would anyone show me kindness? Would anyone see me as human? So, I left. Walked out of my penthouse apartment wearing clothes I found at a thrift store. I took enough cash to survive, but not enough to be comfortable. I rented a room in a boarding house under a false name. And I came here, to this diner, to see what the world looked like from the bottom, instead of the top. Naomi felt like the floor had dropped out from under her. Tears were running down her face, though she hadn't felt them start. You were testing people. Testing me. No, Samuel said urgently, reaching across the table to take her hand again. No, Naomi. I wasn't testing anyone. I was trying to understand. Trying to remember what it felt like to be treated like you mattered not because of what you had, but because of who you were. And you, he said, his voice breaking. You gave me that. Every single day. You saw an old man who had nothing, and you treated him with dignity and respect and genuine kindness. You brought me extra toast. You gave me a scarf when I was cold. You sat with me when you should have been working. You made me feel like I mattered. Not Samuel Crawford, the billionaire. Just Samuel. Just me. She pulled her hand away, overwhelmed. All this time, you could have told me. You could have been honest. I know, he said, tears now running down his own face. And I'm sorry. I was selfish. I was so desperate for something real that I lied to find it. But everything I told you was true. Rebecca did die. I am lonely. I have lost things that money can't replace. The only thing I hid was the money itself. And I hid it because I needed to know if anyone could care about Samuel, the person, instead of Samuel Crawford, the corporation. Marcus, the man with the briefcase, cleared his throat. Mr. Crawford, the board really does need you. There are decisions only you can make. Legal matters that require your immediate attention. Samuel didn't take his eyes off Naomi. Tell the board they can wait. Right now, I need to explain something to someone who matters far more than any business meeting. Marcus looked like he wanted to argue, but thought better of it. He stepped back, giving them space, though his expression made it clear he thought this was insane. Samuel leaned forward. Naomi, I want to do something. Yes. Want to thank you for what you've done for me. Not with words, though I'll say them as many times as you'll listen. But with action. Real action. He turned to Marcus. I want you to draw up paperwork transferring ownership of the building that houses this diner to Miss Naomi Harris. Full ownership, no strings, no conditions. Additionally, I want you to establish a trust fund in her name. Enough to cover her college education and living expenses while she pursues her nursing degree. And I want to set up a foundation that provides scholarships and support for people in this neighborhood who are working hard but don't have resources. Naomi will oversee it, if she's willing. Marcus's pen was already moving across his notepad. Of course, sir. I'll have the documents prepared by tomorrow. Consider it done. Naomi couldn't speak. Couldn't think. The numbers were too big, the gesture too overwhelming. Samuel, I can't accept this. That's too much. I don't want your money. I never wanted your money. I know you didn't, Samuel said gently. That's exactly why you deserve it. You helped me because it was right, not because you thought you'd get something out of it. You gave when you had almost nothing yourself. That's the rarest kind of kindness, Naomi Barty. And I want to honor it. Not repay it, because kindness like yours can't be repaid. But honor it. Rick, the manager, had been standing frozen behind the counter this entire time. Now he stumbled forward, his face red, his eyes wide. "Mr. Crawford, sir, I had no idea if I had known who you were. We would have treated you so much better, given you the best table, anything you wanted, on the house of course. And I want to assure you that we always valued your presence here. It was our pleasure to serve you." Samuel looked at him with an expression of cold disappointment. "You didn't know who I was, and that's exactly the problem. You treated me like I was worthless because I looked poor. You told Naomi to stop caring about me because you thought I wasn't a real customer. You judged my value based on my appearance and my $3 tips. And now that you know I'm wealthy, suddenly I'm worth your respect. That's not respect, Rick. That's greed." Rick's face went from red to white. "Sir, I didn't mean. I was just trying to run a business efficiently. I never meant any disrespect." "You meant exactly that," Samuel said quietly. "And people like you are why people like Naomi are so precious. She didn't need to know who I was to treat me with dignity. She did it because she's a good person. You only care now because you see dollar signs. There's a difference." Rick backed away, his hands shaking, clearly terrified that he was about to lose his job or worse. Diane, other waitress, looked like she wanted to sink through the floor. She had called Samuel Naomi's charity project, had rolled her eyes every time he came in, had made it clear she thought Naomi was wasting her time. Samuel turned back to Naomi. "I can't undo the months of deception. And I understand if you're angry with me. But I want you to know that every conversation we had, every moment we shared, that was real. The friendship was real. You saved me, Naomi. Not from poverty, but from something worse. From loneliness. From forgetting that goodness still exists in the world." She wiped her eyes, trying to process everything. "I don't know what to say." "Say you'll forgive an old fool for lying," Samuel said with a small smile. "Say you'll accept the help I'm offering, not because you need it, though I know you do, but because it would mean the world to me to be able to give it. Say you'll keep being the person you are, because the world desperately needs more people like you." She looked at him, this man who had been both homeless and a billionaire, both a stranger and a friend. The truth was complicated, but the feeling underneath was simple. She cared about him. Not about his money or his company or his influence. About him, Samuel. The lonely old man who loved toast and talked about birds and listened like what she said mattered. "Okay," she said finally. "Okay. I forgive you. And I'll accept your help. But only if you promise me something." "Anything," Samuel said. "Promise me you won't disappear again. Promise me we'll stay friends. Real friends. Not because of what you can give me, but because we actually care about each other." He reached across the table and took both her hands in his. "I promise. You're one of the few genuine friends I have left in this world, Naomi. I'm not letting go of that." Marcus cleared his throat again, more insistently this time. "Sir, we really do need to go. There are time-sensitive matters. The press has gotten wind that you've been found, and we need to control the narrative before rumors spiral further." Samuel nodded slowly. He stood up, and Naomi was struck by how different he looked now. Not physically, he was still the same thin old man in a faded jacket. But his bearing had changed. There was authority in how he moved, confidence in how he held himself. The transformation was startling. He turned to address the entire diner, which was still silent and watching. "To everyone here," he said, his voice carrying easily, "I want to tell you something. I've spent the last 3 months living among you, invisible and ignored by most. I've seen how people treat those they think have nothing. I've experienced the cruelty of assumptions, the casual dismissal of human worth based on appearance. But I've also seen something else. He looked at Naomi. I've seen kindness that costs something, compassion that isn't performed for an audience, generosity that comes from people who have every reason to be selfish and yet choose not to be. That's rare. That's precious. And that's what separates us from the darkness. He paused. I'll be establishing a foundation to support this neighborhood and others like it. Not out of pity, but out of respect. Because I've learned that worth has nothing to do with wealth. It has to do with character. And some of the wealthiest people I know are morally bankrupt, while some of the poorest have riches that can't be counted in any currency. The diner remained silent, everyone absorbing this speech from a billionaire in a brown jacket, standing in their rundown restaurant and talking about wealth and worth. Samuel looked at Rick. As for this establishment, I'm buying the building, as I said. Naomi will own it. What she does with it is her decision. But I would suggest that any manager who judges customers by their appearance rather than their humanity might want to reconsider his approach. Or find a different line of work. Rick looked like he might faint. Marcus made another note. Samuel turned to the bodyguards by the door. Gentlemen, I appreciate you coming to collect me. But I'm not some prisoner who needs escorting. I'm an old man who took a walk and found something more valuable than anything in my corporate portfolio. I found perspective. He walked toward the door, then stopped and looked back at Naomi one more time. Tomorrow morning at 6:15, will you still be here? She smiled through her tears. Every morning, Samuel. Just like always. He nodded, satisfied. Good. Because I'll be here too. My coffee's gotten cold at the penthouse. Doesn't taste the same. With that, Samuel Joseph Crawford walked out of Rosie's diner, followed by lawyers and bodyguards, and the weight of an $11 billion empire. But for 3 months, he had been just Samuel. And for 3 months, Naomi had been just Naomi. And together, they had proven something that the world tries desperately to make us forget. That kindness doesn't need a reason. That dignity isn't earned through wealth. That every human being, regardless of what they have or don't have, deserves to be seen. Really seen. After Samuel left, the diner erupted. Everyone wanted to talk to Naomi, to be close to her, to suddenly remember that they had always supported her kindness toward that poor old man. Rick tried to apologize, stammering about misunderstandings and good intentions. Diane tried to claim she had always thought Naomi's heart was in the right place. The customers, who had complained about Naomi spending too much time with a homeless man, now wanted to hear every detail of her conversations with a billionaire. Naomi heard none of it. She sat back down at Samuel's booth, looking at the coffee cup he'd cut. Left behind, the 3 crumpled dollars still sitting on the table. A tip that meant everything when she thought it was all he had, and somehow meant even more now that she knew it wasn't. She thought about the foundation he wanted her to run, the building he was giving her, the education he was funding. The numbers were staggering, impossible to truly comprehend. But more than any of that, she thought about his promise to come back tomorrow morning at 6:15. Because that's what mattered. Not the money or the ownership or the scholarships, though those would change lives, and she was grateful beyond words. What mattered was that he had seen her. Truly seen her. And she had seen him. 2 people in a world that tries to make us invisible to each other, finding connection in the simplest possible way. Through coffee and toast and kindness that didn't calculate worth. The next morning, Naomi arrived at the diner at 5:30, like she always did, but this time felt different. The building was hers now, Marcus had said. Papers were being drawn up, but the decision had been made. She didn't know what she would do with it yet. Part of her wanted to keep it exactly the same, a place where anyone could come and be treated like they mattered. Part of her wanted to transform it into something more, a community space where people could find support and resources and hope. She'd figure it out. She had time. At 6:14, she poured 2 cups of coffee and made 4 pieces of toast. At 6:15 exactly, the bell above the door chimed. Samuel walked in, and this time, he wasn't alone. He was wearing different clothes now, still simple but clearly expensive, the kind of casual that costs a fortune. Behind him, at a respectful distance, one of the bodyguards waited outside. Samuel had insisted on some security compromise with his lawyers. But inside the diner, it was just him and Naomi. He sat in his usual booth. She brought him his coffee and toast, setting them down with the same care she'd always shown. "Good morning, Samuel," she said. "Good morning, Naomi," he replied, and his smile was real and warm and grateful. They sat together, 2 friends having coffee while the sun rose over Marshall Street. They talked about simple things, the weather, the birds Samuel had seen on his walk, the book Naomi was reading. They didn't talk about billions or foundations or the fact that everything had changed. Because in this moment, in this booth, nothing had changed at all. They were still just Samuel and Naomi. Still just 2 people who had found in each other something the world had tried to convince them didn't exist anymore. Genuine human connection built on nothing but kindness, respect. So what does this story teach us? What truth does it reveal about the world we live in and the people we are? It teaches us that we live in a society that has trained us to judge value by appearance, to assign worth based on wealth, decide who deserves our kindness before we've even spoken a word. It teaches us that we've created systems where a man worth $11 billion can become invisible by simply taking off his expensive clothes, while those born without those clothes are invisible from the start. But more importantly, it teaches us that kindness is a choice we make regardless of what we think we'll get in return. That dignity is something we owe to every human being, not because of what they have, because of what they are, fellow travelers in this brief, difficult, beautiful existence. Naomi didn't help Samuel because she thought he was secretly wealthy. She helped him because he was there, and he needed help, and she had the capacity to give. Kaishi, Imdare. That's the lesson. That's the truth we need to remember. Every person you pass on the street is carrying a story you know nothing about. Every face you dismiss might belong to someone whose life has fallen apart, or someone whose wealth can't buy them what they truly need, or someone who simply wants to be seen as human. You don't know. You can't know. So the only reasonable response is to treat everyone with the same baseline of respect and compassion. Not because you might get something out of it, though sometimes you might. Not because you're afraid they're secretly powerful, though sometimes they are. But because it's right. Because every person deserves dignity. Because kindness costs us so little and means so much to those who receive it. Samuel could have revealed himself at any point. He could have walked in wearing his expensive suits, throwing money around, demanding the best service. He would have gotten it. People would have fallen over themselves to accommodate him. But that's not what he needed. He needed to know if anyone could see him when he looked like nothing, to experience the world as most people experience it, judged and found wanting before being given a chance. What he found in Naomi was someone who refused to judge that way, someone whose compassion wasn't conditional on calculation, someone who saw an old man who needed coffee and a kind word, and gave both without expecting anything in return. And in return, though she never sought it, she received more than money. She received validation, the knowledge that her kindness mattered, that her choice to see people as people made a real difference. She received opportunities that would change her life and the lives of others in her community. But most of all, she received friendship, genuine connection with someone who understood her worth, not because of what she could become, but because of who she already was. This is the exchange the world needs more of. Not transactions, where we calculate worth before we invest emotion, but connections where we offer kindness freely and discover that the act of giving it transforms us as much as it helps the person receiving it. Think about your own life. Think about the people you dismiss, the ones you walk past without seeing, the ones you've already judged before you've spoken to them. The homeless person on the corner, the server who's having a bad day, the co-worker who dresses poorly, the stranger whose life looks nothing like yours. What if you treated them the way Naomi treated Samuel? What if you saw them not as obstacles or problems or irrelevant background characters in your story, but as full human beings deserving of respect? How would that change them? How would it change you? The truth is that we're all invisible to someone. We're all the person someone else has dismissed, the story someone decided wasn't worth hearing, the face someone glanced at and decided didn't matter. We know how that feels. The sting of being overlooked, the pain of being judged, the loneliness of being unseen. So why do we do it to others? Not out of malice usually, out of habit. Out of the learned behavior of a society that has taught us to categorize people into those who matter and those who don't, to conserve our emotional energy for those we deem worthy. But what if we unlearned that? What if we chose differently? Naomi did. She chose to see Samuel not as a category, but as a person. She chose kindness over convenience. She chose compassion over calculation. And that choice didn't just change Samuel's life, or her own. It changed everyone who witnessed it, everyone who heard the story, everyone who now had to confront their own assumptions about worth and humanity. That's the power of kindness. It ripples outward. It challenges the systems that try to make us cold. It reminds us of who we could be if we stopped letting fear and judgment rule our interactions. So if this story touched your heart, if it made you think about the choices you make every day, then let it change something. Not just your feelings, but your actions. Tomorrow, when you leave your house, look at the people you encounter. Really look at them. See them as Samuel saw Naomi's kindness, as something precious in a world that tries to make everything transactional. Offer a kind word to someone who doesn't expect it. Help someone who can't help you in return. Treat the person serving your coffee or bagging your groceries or cleaning your building like they matter, because they do. They're someone's daughter, someone's brother, someone's friend. They're carrying dreams and pain and hopes, just like you. They deserve to be seen. And when you do this, choose kindness without calculation, you're not just making someone else's day better. You're making yourself more human. You're resisting the forces that want to make us all into isolated, suspicious, calculating individuals. You're building the kind of world where Samuel and Naomi's friendship isn't remarkable because it's the only example, but because it's one of many. This story ends with a promise and a question. The promise is that kindness matters, that it changes lives in ways we can't always predict or measure, that every act of genuine compassion sends ripples through the world that touch more lives than we'll ever know. The question is what you'll do with that knowledge. Will you keep walking past people who need to be seen? Will you keep judging worth by appearance? Or will you choose to be like Naomi, someone who sees the humanity in everyone, who offers dignity freely, who understands that we're all just trying to get through this life with as much grace and connection as we can manage? The answer to that question will define not just your story, but the story of everyone whose life you touch. Choose wisely. Choose kindly. Because every story hides a truth, and every truth deserves to be heard. If this story moved you, if it reminded you of something important that the world tries to make you forget, then share it with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe to this channel for more stories that reveal the complicated, beautiful, painful, hopeful truth about what it means to be human in a world that often seems designed to make us forget. Like this video if you believe that every person, regardless of what they have or where they come from or how they look, deserves to be treated with, well, dignity. Comment below and tell us about a time when someone showed you kindness you didn't expect, or when you offered kindness without knowing how much it would matter. Let's build a community of people who refuse to accept invisibility as the price of being human, who choose to see each other, who remember that we're all in this together. Because at the end of the day, that's all we have. Each other. And the choices we make about how we treat each other. Those choices matter. They define us. They create the world we live in. So let's create a world where stories like Samuel and Naomi's aren't exceptional. Let's create a world where kindness is the rule, not the exception. Where dignity is universal, not earned. Where everyone is seen. It starts with one person making one choice, in one moment. It starts with you. Right now. Deciding that the next person you encounter, whoever they are, will be treated like they matter. Because they do. We all do. Remember that. Carry it with awe. You. Let it change how you move through the world. And together, maybe we can build something better than what we inherited. One cup of coffee, one act of kindness, one moment of genuine human connection at a time. Because every story hides a truth, and every truth deserves to be heard.